The knock came at dawn, 3 sharp raps that shattered the mountain silence like gunfire. Vincent Garrett froze mid-motion, his massive hand hovering over the coffee pot, every muscle in his broad shoulders tensing beneath his worn flannel shirt. In 5 years of living alone in this cabin perched high in the Colorado Rockies, not a single soul had climbed the treacherous path to his door. He set down the pot carefully, his calloused fingers reaching instead for the rifle propped against the stone fireplace. The knocking came again, weaker this time, followed by a sound that made his blood run cold. A woman's sob and the thin wail of an infant. Vincent crossed the rough wooden floor in 3 long strides, his boots echoing in the sparse room. He threw open the heavy door and found himself staring down at a sight that would carve itself into his memory forever. A young woman stood swaying on his porch, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt, her dress torn and mud-caked. But it was what she held that stopped his heart. 2 tiny bundles wrapped in a single threadbare blanket, both babies crying weakly. Her green eyes met his for one desperate moment before her knees buckled. Vincent caught her before she hit the ground, his powerful arms gathering both woman and infants against his chest. She was light as a sparrow, burning with fever. He kicked the door shut behind him and carried her to his bed, the only real piece of furniture in the cabin besides his table and chairs. As he laid her down gently, something crinkled in her hand. A letter clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. He pried it loose as carefully as he could, then turned his attention to the babies. They were identical twin girls, couldn't be more than a few months old, with wisps of dark hair and faces red from crying. Vincent had helped birth calves and foals, had even assisted when his sister delivered her first child years ago. But he had never felt so utterly helpless as he did staring down at these 2 tiny lives. The woman moaned, her eyes flickering open. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Read it, the letter. You have to read it." Vincent unfolded the paper with hands that suddenly felt too large and clumsy. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "To whoever finds my sister Elena Wade and her daughters Rose and Lily. My name was Margaret Wade. By the time you read this, I will be dead. 3 days ago, raiders attacked our homestead outside Great Bend, Kansas. They killed my husband Thomas and left us for dead. Elena and I survived, but I took a bullet to the chest. I am bleeding inside, and I know I will not last the journey to safety. Elena is sick with fever from infected wounds. The babies are hungry and need care urgently. I am sending her to the only place I could think of where she might find help. The cabin of Vincent Garrett in the Colorado mountains. Vincent, if you are reading this, I am sorry. We met only once 5 years ago when you came through Great Bend, but I never forgot your kindness when you helped me with my broken wagon. You said if I ever needed anything, you lived in the mountains west of town. I am begging you on my dying breath. Save my sister and her babies. Elena's husband was killed in the raid with mine. She has no one else in this world. The babies are innocent. Please do not turn them away. If you cannot care for them, take them to the church in Great Bend. Father Morrison will help. But please, I beg you, do not let them die in these mountains. Margaret Wade." The letter was dated 4 days ago. Vincent read it twice, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He remembered Margaret Wade now, a cheerful woman with a bright smile who had been stranded on the road with a broken axle. He had fixed it for her, refused payment, and thought nothing more of it. But she had remembered. She had sent her dying sister and 2 helpless infants up a mountain path that would challenge even an experienced tracker, all on the thin thread of hope that he would help. He looked down at Elena. Her fever-flushed face was beautiful despite the dirt and exhaustion. She could not be more than 23 or 24, far too young to be a widow, too young to face such tragedy. The babies had stopped crying, worn out from their ordeal, but they would start again soon if they were not fed. Vincent had no milk, no proper supplies for infants, and barely enough food to sustain himself through the coming winter. The sensible thing would be to load them all onto his horse and take them down to Great Bend immediately. But Elena was in no condition to travel, and he knew from the letter's date that her sister had likely died somewhere on the mountain path. If he left to search for Margaret's body, Elena and the babies might survive alone. He had spent 5 years running from the world, hiding in these mountains after the war had left him hollow and haunted. 5 years of solitude, of silence, of trying to forget the things he had done and seen. And now the world had found him anyway, in the form of a desperate woman and 2 helpless children who needed him more than anyone ever had. "Damn it," he muttered, then immediately felt guilty for cursing in front of babies. He moved to the stove and added more wood to the fire, then filled his largest pot with water from the barrel by the door. The babies would need to be cleaned and warmed. Elena needed her fever broken, and they all needed food. Vincent worked with the methodical efficiency he had learned in the army, pushing aside panic and focusing on one task at a time. He warmed water, found the cleanest cloths he owned, and gently began washing the babies. They were tiny, so fragile he feared his rough hands might break them, but they seemed to calm at his touch. As he worked, Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring names he could not quite hear. The babies' diapers were soaked and filthy. Vincent had to improvise with strips torn from his spare shirts. He had never changed a diaper in his life, but desperation made him creative. By the time both girls were clean and wrapped in warm, dry cloth, he was sweating despite the morning chill. But the moment he set them down, they began to cry again. Hungry, of course they were hungry. Vincent racked his brain. He had no cow, no goat. The nearest settlement was a full day's ride down the mountain. Elena might be able to nurse them if her fever broke, but she was unconscious now, too weak to help. Then he remembered. He had traded with a trapper last month for supplies. The man had given him a small tin of condensed milk as part of the deal. He dug through his sparse pantry until he found it, then diluted it carefully with warm water. He had no bottles, but he had a clean rag. He soaked it in the mixture and offered it to the first baby, the one Elena had called Rose if he remembered the letter correctly. She latched onto it immediately, sucking desperately. Relief flooded through him as he repeated the process with Lily. It was slow, messy work, and he had to remake the mixture 3 times before both babies seemed satisfied. By then the sun was fully up, streaming through the cabin's single window. Vincent looked at the 3 people who had invaded his solitude and felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he had built so carefully over 5 years of isolation. Elena moaned again and he turned to her. Her fever was still dangerously high. He had seen plenty of fever in the war, knew how quickly it could kill. He prepared a cool compress and laid it across her forehead, then forced water between her cracked lips, one careful spoonful at a time. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed. "Margaret?" she whispered. "Where is Margaret?" Vincent hesitated. The truth would devastate her, but he could not lie. "I'm Vincent Garrett," he said softly. "Your sister sent you to me. You're safe now. The babies?" Her hand moved weakly, searching. "They're fine, fed and sleeping. You need to rest and let your fever break." "Margaret?" she asked again, and this time there was desperate hope in her voice. Vincent looked into those fever-bright green eyes and made a decision. "Rest first," he said quietly. "We'll talk when you're stronger." But Elena was not foolish, even in her weakened state. Tears began sliding down her temples. "She's gone, isn't she? She's dead." He wanted to spare her, but she deserved the truth. Her letter said she was dying. "I'm sorry." The sound that came from Elena was barely human, a keening wail of grief that seemed to tear itself from her very soul. Vincent had heard that sound before, on battlefields and in field hospitals, the sound of someone losing everything. Without thinking, he sat on the edge of the bed and gathered her against his chest, letting her sob into his shirt while he held her as gently as his scarred hands could manage. "I'm sorry," he repeated helplessly. "I'm so sorry," she cried until she had no tears left, until the fever and exhaustion pulled her back under. Vincent laid her down carefully and checked on the babies. They slept on, unaware of the tragedy that had made them orphans. He looked at the 3 of them and knew with absolute certainty that his life had just changed forever. The day passed in a blur of activity. Vincent kept the fire burning, changed the babies when they needed it, fed them again with the milk mixture, and tended to Elena's fever. He bathed her face and arms with cool water, forced more liquid down her throat, and prayed to a God he had stopped believing in years ago. By evening, the fever finally broke. Elena's skin cooled, her breathing eased, and she fell into what looked like genuine sleep rather than unconscious delirium. Vincent sagged in his chair by the fire, exhausted in a way he had not been since the war. The babies woke crying, and he fed them again, marveling at how something so small could be so demanding. He must have dozed off in his chair because he woke to find Elena sitting up in bed, watching him with clear eyes. One of the babies was crying softly, and she held out her arms for the child. Vincent brought her Rose, then Lily, and watched as she unbuttoned her dress and began to nurse them. Her hands shook with weakness, but her face held a fierce determination. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not turning us away, for saving us." Vincent felt his neck heat with embarrassment. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Elena said firmly, "they would not have. We both know that." He had no answer to that, so he stood and busied himself making soup from dried vegetables and salt pork. When it was ready, he brought her a bowl. She ate slowly, one-handed, still holding the babies. "Margaret told me about you," Elena said between spoonfuls. "She said you were the kindest man she ever met, that you helped her without asking for anything in return. It was just a wagon wheel. It was everything to her that day, and when the raiders came, when she knew she was dying, she remembered. She used her last strength to write that letter and send me to you." Elena's voice broke. "She saved my life and the girls' lives with her last act on this earth." Vincent stared into the fire, uncomfortable with emotion, with gratitude, with all of this. "How did you make it up the mountain?" "I barely remember. I followed Margaret's directions. She had scouted the path before, thinking we might need to run. I walked and climbed, carrying the girls. When I could not walk anymore, I crawled. I just kept telling myself I had to reach your door. I had to keep the babies alive." The strength it must have taken, the sheer will, staggered him. "You should rest more. You're still weak, I know. But I need to say this while I can." Elena met his eyes directly. "I have nothing to offer you, no money, no possessions, nothing but 2 helpless babies and myself. Margaret's letter said to take us to the church in Great Bend if you could not keep us. I understand if that is what you choose. You did not ask for this burden." Vincent opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. "But I am asking you to let us stay at least for a little while. Let me recover my strength. Let me figure out what to do. The church will likely separate me from the girls, put them in an orphanage, or give them to another family. I cannot bear that. They are all I have left of my husband, of Margaret, please." He looked at her. This woman who had climbed a mountain half dead to save her children, and knew he could not say no, even if he wanted to. And the truth was, he did not want to. Something had shifted inside him the moment he opened his door and saw her standing there. The silence he had craved for 5 years suddenly felt less like peace and more like loneliness. "You can stay," he heard himself say. "All of you. For as long as you need." The relief that flooded Elena's face was almost painful to witness. "Thank you. I will find a way to repay you, I swear it." "There's no debt," Vincent said roughly. "Just focus on getting well." Over the next week, Elena slowly regained her strength. Vincent learned more about caring for infants than he ever imagined he would need to know. The cabin that had been so quiet for so long now rang constantly with the sound of babies crying, Elena singing soft lullabies, and conversations over simple meals. He learned that Elena had been married for just over a year before the raid. Her husband had been a farmer, a good man who had built them a small homestead with his own hands. Margaret and her husband Thomas had lived on the neighboring property. They had been close, the 4 of them building a life together on the Kansas plains. "We were happy," Elena told him one evening, her voice distant with memory. "It was hard work, but we were happy. And then one morning riders came, at least a dozen of them, maybe more. They wanted food, money, anything of value. When Thomas and my husband tried to stop them, she closed her eyes. They shot them both, right in front of us. Then they set fire to the houses and rode off laughing." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. He had seen too much senseless violence in the war, and it sickened him that it continued out here, in places where people were just trying to build honest lives. "Margaret and I ran into the fields with the babies," Elena continued. "But one of the raiders came back. He shot Margaret. I thought he would kill us all, but his friends called him away. They must have assumed we would die out there anyway." Her voice hardened. "Margaret lived for 3 more days, long enough to get us onto the mountain path, long enough to write that letter, long enough to save us. She was brave," Vincent said quietly. "She was everything to me. My older sister, my best friend. We lost our parents to cholera when I was 16. She raised me after that. She taught me how to sew, how to cook, how to be strong." Tears slipped down Elena's cheeks. "I do not know how to exist in a world without her." Vincent had no comfort to offer, no words that could ease that kind of pain. So he simply sat with her in silence, letting her grieve, and somehow that seemed to be enough. As the days passed, they fell into a rhythm. Vincent would wake before dawn and tend to the fire, then begin the endless round of chores that came with living in the mountains. Elena would feed the babies, then help with what she could, mending his worn clothes, cooking meals that were far better than anything he had managed in 5 years, tidying the cabin. She moved carefully, still recovering, but he could see the strength returning to her day by day. The babies grew too. They were healthier now, their cries stronger, their eyes brighter. Vincent found himself picking them up without thinking, soothing them when they fussed, even though a month ago he would have sworn he had no paternal instinct whatsoever. Rose had a calm disposition and seemed fascinated by the firelight. Lily was more demanding, quick to cry but also quick to smile. One morning, Vincent woke to find Elena standing at the window, watching the sunrise over the mountain peaks. She wore one of his spare shirts over her dress for warmth, and her dark hair hung loose down her back. Something about the sight made his breath catch. "It is beautiful up here," she said without turning. "Lonely but beautiful." "That was the point," Vincent admitted, joining her at the window. "After the war, I wanted to be somewhere no one could find me." "What happened in the war?" Elena asked softly. "If you do not mind me asking." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. He had never spoken about it, not to anyone. I did things I am not proud of, killed men because I was ordered to, watched friends die in ways that still give me nightmares. And when it was over, when I came home, I realized I did not know how to be around people anymore, how to pretend everything was normal. So I ran. I came up here and tried to forget. Did it work, the forgetting? No, he said honestly. You cannot forget that kind of thing. You can only learn to live with it. Elena turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. I think you are braver than you believe. Running away takes a different kind of courage. Staying takes another. And opening your door to us when you could have turned us away, that takes the most courage of all. Vincent felt heat rise in his face. He was not accustomed to being seen so clearly, to having someone look past his scars and walls. I just did what anyone would do. You keep saying that, Elena said with a small smile. But I do not think you believe it any more than I do. The autumn progressed and the air grew colder. Vincent knew he needed to go down to the nearest trading post for supplies before the heavy snows came. He had enough food to last through winter, but not enough for 4 people. And they needed more cloth for the babies, more milk, 100 other things. I will be gone 3 or 4 days, he told Elena one morning in late October. Will you be all right here alone? She straightened her shoulders. I am stronger now, and I have the rifle you showed me how to use. We will manage. Vincent did not like leaving them, but there was no choice. He loaded his horse with furs to trade and set off down the mountain just after dawn. The trading post was a rough settlement called Cedar Creek, a collection of buildings that served trappers and prospectors. He had been there only twice before in 5 years, preferring to avoid human contact whenever possible. The trader, a gruff man named Samuel, raised his eyebrows when he saw Vincent's list of supplies. You got a woman up there now, Garrett? Just needs, Vincent said shortly. Needs for what? That is a lot of cloth and milk. And baby things? Samuel's eyes widened. You got babies? You going to trade or ask questions all day? Samuel laughed. Trade, just curious. You've been alone up there so long, figured you would stay that way. Vincent loaded his horse with the supplies and spent the night in Cedar Creek's rough inn, uncomfortable with the noise and crowds, even though there were maybe 20 people in the whole settlement. He left before dawn and made good time on the return journey. When the cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, Vincent felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Relief, yes, but also something warmer. Something that felt almost like coming home. Elena opened the door before he could knock, her face lighting up with a smile that made his heart stutter. You are back, we missed you. It was only 3 days, Vincent said, but he could not help smiling back. 3 very long days, Elena said, taking some of the supplies from his arms. Rose would not stop crying the second night. I think she missed your singing. I do not sing, you do, Elena laughed. When you think no one is listening. That old war song, the one about Johnny coming home. Vincent felt his face heat again. He had not realized she could hear him. But before he could respond, Lily started crying, and the moment passed as they both moved to tend to the babies. That evening, after the girls were asleep and they sat by the fire with coffee, Elena said quietly, I have been thinking about the future, about what I should do. Vincent's stomach tightened. He had known this conversation was coming, but he was not ready for it. What are you thinking? I cannot stay here forever, Elena said, though she sounded reluctant. It would not be proper. You are a single man, I am a widow. People will talk. There are no people up here to talk, but there will be eventually. And I need to think about the girls, about their future. They need schooling, friends, a real life. Not just this cabin. She met his eyes. But I do not want to go back to Great Bend. There are too many memories there. Too much pain. Where would you go? Vincent asked, his voice rough. I do not know. Maybe Denver. I could find work as a seamstress or a cook. Find a place to raise the girls. The thought of the cabin without them, of going back to the silence and solitude, filled Vincent with a panic he did not fully understand. Or you could stay, he heard himself say. Elena's eyes widened. Vincent, I know it would not be proper, he said quickly, but we could make it proper. I am not saying this right. What I mean is, he took a breath and forced himself to meet her eyes. What I mean is I have come to care for you, for all of you. These past weeks having you here, it has made me realize how empty my life was before. I do not want to go back to that. I do not want you to go. Vincent, Elena whispered, her eyes shining with tears. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I would like you to stay, as my wife, if you would have me. I know I am not much. I live in a cabin on a mountain with few prospects, but I can keep you safe. I can provide for you and the girls, and I swear to you, I would spend every day trying to make you happy. Elena was crying now, but she was also smiling. You foolish, wonderful man, do you really think I care about prospects? You saved our lives, you took us in when you did not have to. You have been nothing but kind and gentle and good. And she paused and said it clearly. I have been falling in love with you since the moment you caught me on your doorstep, and I looked up into your eyes. Vincent felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You have? Yes, you stubborn man. And I was terrified because I did not think you felt the same. I thought you just saw us as a responsibility. Never, Vincent said fiercely. He crossed to her and dropped to his knees beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Never that. You are not a burden, Elena, you are. He struggled for the words. You are everything. You and those babies, you brought light back into my life. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something other than survival. I love you. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me. Elena cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing over his bearded cheeks. Then marry me, Vincent Garrett. Make us a family. Let us build a life together in these mountains. He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more. She tasted like coffee and hope, and Vincent felt 5 years of darkness begin to crack and fall away. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. We will have to go down to Great Bend, he said. Find a preacher. Make it official. Not yet, Elena said. Let us wait until spring. The passes will be snowed in soon, and I do not want to risk the journey with the babies. Besides, she smiled, I like the idea of a winter here with you, just us, before we have to face the world. Vincent could not argue with that. The thought of months alone with Elena, learning each other, building their life together without the interference of others, was more appealing than he wanted to admit. Winter came early and hard that year. By mid-November, the snow was already piling high around the cabin, and the passes were impassable. Vincent had prepared well, though. They had plenty of firewood, enough food, and most importantly, they had each other. The long winter nights became precious. After the babies were asleep, Vincent and Elena would sit by the fire talking for hours. She told him about her childhood, about growing up with Margaret, about the dreams she and her husband had shared. He told her about his life before the war, about his family back east whom he had not seen in over a decade, about the things he hoped to build in the future. They grew closer in those quiet hours, not just in affection but in understanding. Elena learned that beneath Vincent's rough exterior beat the heart of a deeply good man who had been wounded by the world and needed time to heal. Vincent learned that Elena's gentle nature hid a core of steel, forged by loss and hardship but never broken. By Christmas, the cabin felt like a real home. Elena had sewn curtains from some of the cloth Vincent bought, had arranged his sparse possessions into something approaching coziness. The babies were growing fast, starting to make sounds that were almost words, reaching for things with chubby fingers. Vincent carved wooden toys for them, simple rattles and blocks, his large hands surprisingly deft with the knife. Elena watched him work one evening and said softly, "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I already am one," Vincent replied, not looking up from his carving, maybe not by blood but in every way that matters. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. She crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much." Vincent set down his carving and turned to pull her into his lap, kissing her soundly. They had been careful, respectful of boundaries, but the attraction between them burned hotter with each passing day. Still, Vincent refused to push. They would be married in the spring, and he could wait, though waiting, he was discovering, was harder than he had anticipated. The snow melted in late March, revealing a world washed clean and new. As soon as the passes cleared enough for travel, Vincent loaded the wagon he had built over the winter, and they began the journey to Great Bend. It took 5 days, traveling slowly with the babies, but Vincent used the time to prepare Elena for what they would find. "The town has grown since I left," he said. "More settlers, more businesses. It might be hard seeing all those people." "I know," Elena said quietly, "but we need to do this properly, and I want to see Margaret's grave, say goodbye." They arrived in Great Bend on a Wednesday afternoon. The town was indeed bigger than Vincent remembered, with new buildings lining the main street. People stared as they passed, curious about the massive bearded man and the young woman with twin babies. Vincent took them straight to the church. Father Morrison was an elderly man with kind eyes who remembered Margaret well. When Elena explained who she was, the priest's face creased with sorrow. "I heard about the raid," he said gently. "I am so sorry for your loss. Your sister was buried in our cemetery. I can take you to her grave if you would like." Elena nodded, her hand tight in Vincent's. Together they followed the priest to a simple wooden marker that bore Margaret's name. Elena sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face, and Vincent gave her space to grieve while he held the babies. When she finally stood, her face was composed but sad. "She saved us," Elena told the priest. "She gave her life to make sure we survived. And she sent us to this man, who took us in and gave us a home. We want to be married, Father. We want to honor her memory by building the life she wanted for us." Father Morrison smiled. "Then we shall marry you. Tomorrow, if you wish." They spent the night in the town's only hotel, a modest establishment that felt overwhelmingly crowded and loud after months in the mountain silence. Vincent barely slept, both from anticipation and from the strangeness of being around so many people again. The next morning, they stood before Father Morrison in the small church. Elena wore a dress she had sewn herself over the winter, simple but beautiful. Vincent had bathed and trimmed his beard, feeling awkward in his cleanest clothes. A few townspeople had gathered to witness, drawn by curiosity more than anything else. But when Father Morrison began the ceremony, when Vincent looked into Elena's eyes and spoke his vows, the rest of the world fell away. He promised to love her, to cherish her, to protect her and the children for all his days. She promised the same, her voice steady and sure. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, Vincent kissed her with a tenderness that made the watching women sigh. This was real now. They were a family, bound by law and love and choice. They spent a week in Great Bend, taking care of business. Vincent filed a proper claim on his mountain property, made arrangements with a lawyer to ensure Elena and the girls would be provided for if anything happened to him. Elena visited Margaret's grave every day, sometimes talking for hours to her sister's memory. On their last day in town, they were approached by an older woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Pemberton. "I knew your sister," she told Elena. "She was a dear friend. I am so glad you survived and so glad you found happiness." She looked at Vincent approvingly. "You have a good man there. Hold on to him." "I intend to," Elena said, squeezing Vincent's hand. The journey back to the mountain felt different. They were returning home now, truly home, and the cabin seemed to welcome them when they finally arrived. Vincent carried Elena over the threshold, making her laugh. Then they spent their first night as husband and wife, wrapped in each other's arms while the babies slept peacefully in their cradles. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Vincent and Elena built their life together in that mountain cabin, expanding it as the girls grew. He taught Elena to hunt and fish, to read the weather and navigate the mountain paths. She taught him to read properly, to enjoy poetry, to see beauty in small things. Rose and Lily grew into bright, curious children who knew every inch of the mountain. Vincent told them stories of their parents, of Thomas and Margaret, making sure they knew where they came from. Elena kept Margaret's letter safe, promising to give it to the girls when they were old enough to understand the sacrifice that had saved their lives. When the girls were 3, Elena realized she was pregnant again. Vincent was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. The pregnancy was easier than Elena had feared, and in the spring of 1877 she gave birth to a healthy boy. They named him Thomas Matthew, after both their fathers. Vincent held his son for the first time and felt tears stream down his weathered face. "I never thought I would have this," he told Elena. "A family, a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me that. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything." Elena corrected gently. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, whom they named Margaret. By then, the cabin had grown into a proper house, and Vincent had built up a successful trade in furs and carved goods. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Rose and Lily, now 7 years old, were inseparable. They helped care for their younger siblings, learned their lessons from Elena, and followed Vincent around like devoted shadows. He taught them everything he knew about the mountains, about survival, about being strong and capable. One evening, when the children were all asleep and Vincent and Elena sat on their porch watching the sunset, she said, "Do you ever regret it, taking us in that day? Your life could have been so much simpler." Vincent pulled her close against his side. "Not for a single moment. Before you knocked on my door, I was not living. I was just existing. You gave me a reason to live again. You and those babies. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," Elena said, echoing her words from years before. As the children grew older, they sometimes traveled down to Great Bend for supplies and socializing. The town had grown into a proper city, and the girls were fascinated by the shops and people. But they always returned to the mountain with relief, this wild, beautiful place that was home. Vincent taught Thomas to hunt and trap, passing on the skills that had kept him alive for so long. The boy was a natural, quick and quiet in the woods. Margaret was more like her mother, gentle and artistic, but she loved the mountain as fiercely as her siblings. Rose and Lily never forgot the story of how they came to be Vincent's daughters. On their 10th birthday, Elena gave them Margaret's letter to read. They pored over it for hours, then asked Vincent endless questions about that first day. "Were you scared?" Rose asked. "When you found us, terrified," Vincent admitted. "I had no idea what to do with babies, but you figured it out," Lily said confidently. "You always figure things out." "Not always," Vincent said, "but I try, and I had your mother to help me." "Tell us again about Aunt Margaret," Rose said softly. "About how she saved us." Vincent told them the story again, the way he had dozens of times before, about Margaret's courage, about the mountain climb, about the letter that had changed all their lives. The girls listened with rapt attention, treasuring every detail about the aunt they had never known, but whose sacrifice had given them life. When Vincent turned 40, Elena surprised him with a party. She had invited their nearest neighbors, a trapper and his wife who lived a few miles away, and prepared a feast. The children had made decorations, and even Vincent, who hated being the center of attention, had to admit it was a good day. That night, lying in bed with Elena tucked against his side, Vincent reflected on how much his life had changed. 15 years ago, he had been a broken man hiding in the mountains, trying to outrun his demons. Now he was a husband, a father, a member of a community. He had purpose, meaning, "Love, what are you thinking about?" Elena murmured, half asleep. "About how lucky I am," Vincent said simply. "We are both lucky," Elena said, "to have found each other, to have this life." The next few years brought more changes. Rose and Lily, at 13, were becoming young women. They helped their mother with the household, cared for their younger siblings, and began to show interest in the world beyond the mountain. Vincent knew the day would come when they would want to leave, to build their own lives, but he was not ready to think about that yet. Thomas, now 10, was already as tall as his mother and showed signs of inheriting his father's powerful build. He was quiet like Vincent, thoughtful and observant, but he had Elena's kindness. Margaret, at 8, was the bright spark of the family, always laughing, always getting into mischief. One autumn day, a stranger came to their door. Vincent answered it with his rifle in hand, old habits dying hard, but the man held up his hands peacefully. "Are you Vincent Garrett?" the stranger asked. "Who is asking?" "My name is Jonathan Garrett. I am your brother." Vincent nearly dropped the rifle. "Jonathan?" The man smiled, and Vincent could see the family resemblance now in the shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw. "I have been looking for you for 2 years. Finally tracked you down through the land office in Great Bend. I had to see for myself that you were alive and well." Vincent invited him in, stunned. He had not seen his brother in almost 20 years, not since before the war. Elena welcomed Jonathan warmly, and the children stared at this unexpected uncle with wide eyes. Over the next few days, the brothers caught up. Jonathan told Vincent about the family back east, about their parents who had passed away hoping to see their eldest son one more time. Vincent felt guilt twist in his gut, but Jonathan shook his head. "They understood," he said gently. "They knew the war had hurt you. They just wanted to know you were happy." "I am," Vincent said, looking at Elena and the children. "I truly am." Jonathan stayed for a week, getting to know his nieces and nephews, marveling at the life Vincent had built. Before he left, he extracted a promise that Vincent would write, that they would stay in contact. Vincent agreed, and he kept that promise. Letters began flowing back and forth, reconnecting him with the family he had lost. When Rose and Lily turned 16, they announced they wanted to attend a school in Denver. Vincent's first instinct was to refuse, to keep them safe on the mountain. But Elena stopped him. "They need to grow," she said quietly. "They need to see the world, find their own paths. We cannot keep them here forever." Vincent knew she was right, even though it broke his heart. They made arrangements with a family friend in Denver, and in the fall of 1886, the twins left home for the first time. The house felt empty without them, even with Thomas and Margaret still there. But the girls came home for holidays, full of stories about their schooling in the city. They were thriving, growing into capable young women who would have made Margaret proud. And they always said the same thing. The mountain was home, and they would never forget where they came from. Thomas and Margaret continued their education at home, with Elena supplementing their lessons with books ordered from Denver. Vincent taught them everything he knew about the land, about living in harmony with nature, about hard work and integrity. When Rose turned 20, she brought home a young man named David, a teacher she had met in Denver. Vincent was suspicious at first, protective of his daughter, but David proved himself to be honest and hard-working. He asked Vincent's permission to marry Rose, and after a long conversation, Vincent gave his blessing. The wedding was held at the mountain house, with family and friends traveling from all over. It was a joyous occasion, and Elena cried happy tears as she watched her eldest daughter marry. Lily served as maid of honor, and Vincent walked Rose down the makeshift aisle with a lump in his throat. "You will always be my daughter," he told her, just before he gave her away. "No matter where life takes you." "I know, Papa," Rose said, using the name she had called him since she was old enough to talk, "and you will always be my hero." Lily married 2 years later to a doctor she met through Rose. Thomas, at 21, decided to stay on the mountain and work with his father, building up their trade business. Margaret, at 19, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher and go to college. Vincent and Elena, now in their 50s, found themselves with an empty nest more often than not. But the house was never truly empty. Grandchildren began arriving, visiting during summers and holidays, filling the rooms with laughter once more. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Elena back to Great Bend. They visited Margaret's grave together, and Elena laid fresh flowers on the headstone. "Thank you," she whispered to her sister. "Thank you for sending me to him. Thank you for saving us. Look at the life we have built, Margaret. Look at all the beauty that came from your sacrifice." Vincent wrapped his arm around his wife, holding her as she cried. They had both lost so much in their lives, but they had also gained more than either of them had ever dreamed possible. That evening, back in the hotel, Elena said, "I want to go back to the cabin. Our first cabin where we fell in love. Can we do that tomorrow?" Vincent agreed, and the next day they made the journey up the mountain. The original cabin was still there, smaller than Vincent remembered, but solid. They spent the night there, just the two of them, remembering those first winter months when they were learning to love each other. "I would do it all over again," Elena said, lying in Vincent's arms in the narrow bed. "Every hardship, every loss, every moment of fear, because it all led me to you. And I would open that door 1,000 times, Vincent replied, kissing her forehead. "Because every time it would be you standing there, changing my life forever." The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Jonathan came to visit every year, bringing news of the family back east. Rose and Lily had children of their own, and those children had children. Thomas married a local woman and built his own house on the mountain property, staying close to his parents. Margaret became a successful teacher and principal, but she always came home for Christmas. Vincent and Elena grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down, but their love never dimming. They sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset over the mountains, holding hands like they had when they were young. When Vincent turned 70, he had a heart attack while chopping wood. Thomas found him and got him inside, but the doctor from Great Bend was clear. Vincent's heart was failing. He might have a year, maybe 2 if he was lucky. Vincent took the news stoically, but Elena was devastated. "I am not ready to lose you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I am not going anywhere yet," Vincent promised. "I still have time to love you, to see my grandchildren grow. I am going to fight for every day I have left." And he did. Vincent lived for 3 more years, 3 precious years filled with family gatherings and quiet moments with Elena. He taught his grandson to carve wood, passed on his knowledge of the mountains to anyone who would listen. And most importantly, he made sure Elena knew every single day how much he loved her. On a cold January morning in 1903, Vincent Garrett died peacefully in his sleep, with Elena holding his hand. He was 73 years old. The funeral was held at the mountain house, with family coming from across the country. Rose and Lily, now in their 40s with grown children of their own, stood by their mother as they said goodbye to the man who had been their father in every way that mattered. Elena was heartbroken, but she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, making sure she was never isolated in her grief. She continued to live in the mountain house, refusing all suggestions that she move to the city. "This is where Vincent and I built our life," she said firmly. "This is where I will stay until I join him." Elena lived for another 7 years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the family she and Vincent had created would continue for generations. She spent her days reading, sewing, and writing letters to her vast family. Every evening, she would sit on the porch where she and Vincent had spent so many hours, and talk to him as if he were still beside her. "I will see you soon, my love," she would say. "Wait for me." On a warm spring morning in 1910, Elena Wade Garrett passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 74 years old. Her children buried her beside Vincent on the mountain they both loved, with a view of the peaks where they had built their life together. The headstone read, "Elena Garrett, beloved wife, mother and friend. She found love in the mountains and built a family that will never be forgotten." Beside it, Vincent's read, "Vincent Garrett, beloved husband, father and protector. He opened his door to love and it changed his life forever." And above both stones, a third marker had been placed years before. "Margaret Wade, loving sister." Her courage saved her family and created a legacy of love. The mountain house stayed in the family for generations. Rose's great-great-grandchildren would eventually restore it and turn it into a museum of sorts, preserving the story of the mountain man who opened his door to a desperate woman with twin babies and a letter, and how that single act of kindness had created a family that spanned a century. Visitors to the house could read Margaret's original letter, carefully preserved under glass. They could see the simple furniture Vincent had built, the quilts Elena had sewn, the carved toys he had made for his children, and they could stand on that porch and look out at the mountains and understand what it meant to build a life from love and courage and hope. The story of Vincent and Elena became a family legend, passed down through generations. Every child in the family knew about the day Vincent opened his door and found Elena standing there with Rose and Lily. They knew about Margaret's sacrifice, about the long winter when Vincent and Elena fell in love, about the life they built together against all odds. And every child learned the most important lesson from that story. That family is not just about blood. It is about the choices we make, the people we let into our hearts, and the love we build despite hardship and loss. Vincent Garrett had been a broken man hiding in the mountains, and Elena Wade had been a desperate widow with nothing left but 2 babies and hope. But together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would echo through time long after they were gone. Their story was one of courage and redemption, of second chances and enduring love. It proved that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is open your door when someone knocks. Even when you are afraid, even when you are broken, even when you think you have nothing left to give. Because you never know when that knock might bring you everything you have been missing, everything you need to become whole again. Vincent had opened his door to a stranger and found his family. Elena had climbed a mountain with her last strength and found her home. And together they had built a love story that would inspire generations to come. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can still find a way to flourish. The mountains stood eternal, watching over the graves of Vincent and Elena Garrett, guardians of a love story that had begun with 3 desperate knocks on a cabin door and ended with a legacy that would never be forgotten. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the peaks, some swore they could still hear the echo of laughter from the old house. The sound of a family that had been forged not by blood alone, but by the unbreakable bonds of love, sacrifice, and choice.